listening to the Takeback Podcast, where women of color creatives come together to inspire, empower, and encourage each other.
I'm Jess Pillay, an Indo-Fijian independent singer-songwriter.
And I'm Angelica Dianda, a Mexican-American licensed mental health counselor and singer.
And this is the podcast where we explore and elevate stories from women of color who are artists, musicians, actors, entrepreneurs, and so on, who are navigating and taking back systems designed against them. Welcome back to the Takeback Podcast. I never thought I was going to say those words again, but here we are. I'm Jess Pillay. If you don't already know me, I'm a singer-songwriter from Seattle, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host and best friend, Angelica Dianda, who is a mental health professional and a singer, and we are bringing the podcast back for this one episode.
Yeah, it's wild that we're back, and we're so glad that you're tuning in. If you're finding our podcast for the first time, we want to say hello and welcome. Just so you guys know the backstory of our podcast, Jess and I recorded a podcast back in 2022. And that podcast was a limited series, about 14 episodes, where we interviewed women of color creatives, and we just asked them all sorts of questions regarding the creative process, things that they did to take care of themselves, specifically when dealing with big things such as racial injustices or trauma. We've also talked about a lot of mental health, which is my favorite topic. And then we ended the show in December of 2022. But we decided, with everything that's going on right now in our world, especially with the recent elections, we wanted to create this special one-off episode that you guys are listening to now.
Yeah, so if you want to check out our previous episodes, they're all on YouTube, Spotify, all the different places that you would find podcasts. Look up the Takeback Podcast and you'll find it. Of course, if you're watching this, you did find your way to our YouTube channel, so welcome. We're really glad you're here. We are firm believers that people need to create art and that women of color should use their voices to make the world a better place through their art, through their music, through their graphic designs, through whatever art form you are a part of. But it's hard to do that when you kind of feel like shit and the world feels like it's about to basically implode. So for anybody who has been blissfully living under a rock, first of all, I envy you.
Yeah, I don't know how you guys got away with that at all.
But for anybody who doesn't know, which I'm sure most of you do, what happened is we had another election here in the U.S. in November, and Donald Trump won again, and he's headed back to the White House in a few weeks from the time of this recording. And so, yeah, what does that have to do with our podcast?
Well, we originally created this podcast to inspire, encourage, and to empower women of color creatives in navigating the business realm, but also being able to not only express themselves creatively, but also to find ways to nourish and take care of themselves regarding like things like mental health and things, as I know is a buzzword in our world, but self-care. Mm-hmm. But it can be really, really hard to creatively be inspired or to create things when it feels like our world is on fire and when we're dealing with situations and circumstances that literally threatens us, our humanity, our livelihood. As a creative, it can really feel like the rug is pulled out from under you, which can really, really stifle that creative process. So as we were talking and sharing earlier, people right now are having some really, really big feelings with everything that's going on in our world. Some big emotions like anxiety, fear, some grief, right? A lot of grief. But not only that, the big question that's looming is, what's the future going to hold? What's in it for us? How are we going to take care of ourselves? So this
isn't really like the other elections that we've had.
It's not.
You know, in the past, it's like, okay, my candidate that I wanted didn't win. 4 years go by, someone else is going to come in. But I think this one feels really different. Mm-hmm. So the emotions around it are a lot bigger. And I think a lot of us, like you said, just don't really know where the country is headed. Or we have some feelings around where it might be headed, and it feels scary in terms of where it's headed.
And so with all that being said, just kind of like what Jess just mentioned, we wanted to take the time to create this special episode where we hold space for people just to know that we see you, we hear you, and collectively we're grieving with you.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, we're not political analysts, so the goal of this episode is not to provide any kind of commentary on what we think happened. We kind of have been doing that offline, I think, but we won't do that in this space. We will leave some links in our show notes, I think, that maybe might help those of you who are feeling like you need to understand that better. Our goal is, like you said, that we just want you to know that we see you, we hear you, we feel what you're feeling, especially if you're feeling anxious or sad or angry or alone. And we just want you to know that you're not alone. We are with you. And there's work for us to do. So we're going to talk about that today. We hope that by listening to this episode that it's validating, that people, that you feel like you're getting something from this and figuring out how you want to show up in the world, whether that's through creative work, through activism, through community building, just through your own relationships, even sort of knowing like how to talk to people,
Right.
Because it's been interesting for me, at least, to like kind of find out who voted what way. And not that I want to make that the whole identity of a person.
Yeah.
But it just feels different this time.
It does.
And there's a lot of feelings, like you said, kind of around that and figuring out how to navigate that. So tell us, what can people expect from this episode?
So we're going to spend the next couple of minutes just having a casual conversation like you've already seen. We're going to take a few moments to ask some questions that we've been kind of running through our minds since the election. And maybe you listeners are asking these same questions too.
But before we do that, this is pretty exciting. We have sponsors today. We've never had sponsors. So our first sponsor that we want to shout out is Musicology Co. right here in Edmonds. This is where we are, this beautiful space. Musicology Co. is a woman-owned record store and music boutique that features weekly live music of all genres. They describe themselves as the place for music in Edmonds. So for our local listeners, if you're in Edmonds or near Edmonds anytime soon, please stop in. They're right on 5th Avenue here on kind of Main Street of Edmonds. And you can buy records, you can pick up really cool merch. They've got stuff from a lot of local artists and local bands, and they put on live performances every Saturday night, sometimes other nights of the week as well. So it's a really great place to come and build community with the local music community and hear some great live music and meet some cool people. So check out their website. That's where you can find upcoming performances and more information about some of their products. So their website is musicologyco.com. And thank you again to Musicology for being our very first sponsor of the episode.
All right. So for our first question, Jess, how are you feeling? And how have the past few weeks since the elections been for you?
It's a big question. I think right now it's like I've been going through kind of the cycles of grief, right?
Right.
So initially I was like the day after the election, I was just numb. Like I literally my body felt numb, and I had to work. And I just remember sitting at my desk all day just being like, what am I doing? Yeah. And I couldn't process anything, couldn't really like make sense of anything, couldn't really focus on my work. I was really distracted. And then I kind of moved out of that numb space into a space of like just rage,
Yeah.
And I, snarked a little bit, I think, on social media, as a lot of people were doing, and just kind of, saying some things. I saw a lot of sentiments that I also felt where it was like, if you voted for this individual, please just delete me from your life. Not even just your social media. Just right. Let's not be friends anymore. And then I had to kind of take a pause and think about it more and say, like, is that really what I want? And to be honest, I don't have a clear answer to that right now, because I think what I'm struggling with is, like, how do you have conversations with somebody like me
right.
or you we're very vocal about our beliefs and our viewpoints around justice and racial equity. We try to bring those things into not just conversations like this, you know, but in every aspect of our lives, right? And to like be in community with people that I've been in community with for multiple years who are just kind of like, yeah, I know he's a bigot. I know he's a racist. I know he's a xenophobe, but I'm just going to vote for him anyway. Just made me be like, what do you think of me then? Yeah. Like, what is our relationship? So I went through some anger for sure. And then I went after that, you know, it's been a few weeks now, I guess like a month at the time of the filming of this. Then I kind of moved into the activism space again, where it became, okay, what do I do? Right? Like, I think of myself as somebody who's trying to bring healing and hope into the world. We've talked about that on previous episodes of this show. Many, many conversations we've had. If you've seen me play live, that's something I talk about all the time from the stage. You know, that's how I see my, you know, to use our old church word from growing up, calling. It's like, how do I bring hope?
The good calling.
Hope and healing into the world. And so now I think I'm in that space of just kind of asking that question and trying to get creative again. So that was a long-winded answer, but that's how I'm feeling.
Answer.
It's been, and here's the other thing I'll say is I think it's going to be a lot of ups and downs of all of those things.
Yes.
It's not like, you know, we talk about the process of grief. It's not like you just kind of cycle through each one and then it's this neatly packaged thing. I'm sure I'm going to have days where I'm just going to wake up and be like, fuck, I hate this, you know?
Yeah.
And that's just reality. Yeah. And then some days where I might feel like I don't want to get out of bed because we're getting closer to inauguration or, you know, he does something stupid and I'm going to, you know, read the headlines and be pissed off or depressed or whatever. So it's a lot of mixed emotions happening.
It's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about for you?
You know, I'm feeling not that much different, very similar. It's the same thing. Thinking about grief, and I know, you know, in my world in mental health, I think people often think of like grief when you lose someone, like from a death or a loss. But this type of grief is really unconventional and untraditional, but there's still a loss. And I think that, and this is like, I'm grieving like the loss of like just the humanity and just like seeing people that might not look like you, sound like you, come from different backgrounds. And yet politically, people voted in a person that has said people like my friend Jess or people like my family that we're othered and we don't belong. And that has been really painful to watch. Similar to you, on the day after the election, I also had to go to work. I had a full day of clients.
I can't imagine doing your job, especially
you know,
that day after.
I'm going to be quite candid. Honestly, that day I woke up and was getting ready for work and I asked myself, like, do I have it in me? Do I actually have it in me to go to work? Because what's different about this is that this feels like deja vu, but different. Yeah. Because like we've lived through this before.
Right.
We've gone through this before. But this time, the difference is we've already lived through this person's presidency, iteration 1. And now we know things that we didn't know. And in fact,
that's what's hardest.
It is
about it.
And in fact, it
like
was,
you could give people the benefit of the doubt before in 2016 where it's like, okay, yeah, he said these things, but we don't really know what he's going to do.
Right.
There's checks and balances in place. There's these guardrails. We don't know if he's really going to be able. This time feels really.
It feels
scarier.
It feels scary, and it's weird. It was, you know, on election night as we were seeing the polls and the count coming in, and I remember looking at my husband and I said to him, I feel eerily calm. And it
interesting.
And it was weird, and his response was like, well, because we know what's coming, and it's so weird to say that.
But do we?
But I don't see. That's the thing is I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. But yeah, like I was saying before, that the day after the election, I really seriously asked myself, like, do I have it in me? Do I have the energy and the strength and the mental emotional capacity to like go into not only a full day of work, but also there was other things that were happening at my job with a lot of changes of systems, which was already going to be a high stressful day. And I almost called out And I decided in that moment, I was like, I have people that are depending on me. And so I held space for myself for those few moments of like, okay, Angelica, like, this is weighty, this is heavy. And in a weird way, I had to compartmentalize for a minute. I was like, I got to show up for my people. And I had the strangest thing happen that day. You know, for therapists, you know, we hold a lot of space for people. We hold space for their emotions and some really, really weighty things that they're navigating. And for the first time ever in my career, literally, I can say ever in my career, I had a client that asked me, like, I was thinking about you today, post-election. This was a woman of color. And I was talking with my coworkers and we were thinking, our therapists, how are they doing? How the conversation, and and it was a very genuine ask. She's like, how are you doing? I was like,
did you start sobbing? Because I might have.
It literally kind of was like a gut in the, like, I don't know, like I felt like a throat punch. Like, for a second, like I couldn't.
Yeah.
I kind of held my breath and of course that moment I was like, I had a choice. I was like, do I want to give the therapist response or do I want to give the human response? And I gave the human response, which is like,
But that's what makes you a good therapist.
Well, thank you. This is not about boosting my ego, but anyways, but kind of like the long-winded answer, just kind of like you were saying, it's been ebbs and flows, lots of ebbs and flows. I haven't hit the rage yet, but I'm sure that's going to come at some point. I don't know when, and I don't know what's going to look like.
It's just because I'm the hothead, and that's where I go earlier on. She's the calm one in the relationship.
I mean,
when it comes to that.
We'll see. We'll see. I think maybe we balance each other out.
Yeah,
like
true.
when one gets hot, the other one's cool and calm.
True.
So if we're both hot-headed at
but
the same time.
Who sends the most ragey texts in our relationship?
That's true. You do. You really do.
I'm just saying.
I take a minute.
I'm an external processor, you guys.
I send some ragey gifts.
That's what it is.
So,
yeah.
And maybe reels.
Or memes.
Or memes. But yeah.
Yes. Thank you for sharing. As you've been talking to people just in life, at work, wherever, are there any sort of themes that are coming up that you're noticing, especially among, I would say, people of color, but also like creatives that you connect with?
You know, interestingly enough, people have been, at least in my world, really quiet about it. I think part of it, I think there's a collective like holding our breath a little bit about like what's going to come. I will say my clientele that I'm working with now, entering into this presidency looks very, very different from the clientele I was working with in the last iteration of the presidency. But what's interesting is just seeing things that our people are doing just to not only protect themselves, but care for themselves. So, and a lot of it is looking like, I'm seeing a lot of people doing communal connections as a way to kind of not only find support, but literally to keep themselves safe, which
I think that's the only thing that's going to save us.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you mean? Like, what's an example of that?
So for example, I won't go into too much details, but, I was working with a person who, in the last, presidency iteration, they, were undocumented.
Okay.
And just that journey and that process of what they had to go through to, get status and to get their green card. And now the iteration looks different, which is like basically safety planning. I hate to say that. I'm going to say it right now, guys. If you are in that situation, I'm going to say it is okay to give yourself permission to safety plan. What do I mean by that? Is getting your affairs in order, getting your documents in order, letting people that you love and that care for you, let them know. And I know these are weighty conversations to have, which is, for example, say, Jess, if you don't hear from me in a few days, these are the people that you need to call. These are the people that you need to inform. This is where you can send money. And like I said, this is really heavy conversations that are happening right now, not only in our community of colors, but specifically with immigrant communities. Because one of the things that's really scary is a lot of the rhetoric that's going around regarding deportation. And just so you guys know, there are a ton of organizations that support and that want to make sure that people are safe, but also to advocate for you. So we'll make sure to include some links in our show notes so that you are aware and connected of those resources as well.
That's great advice. Thank you. Yeah, I think I spend a lot of my time in kind of the artist, creative space. The theme that keeps emerging for me is like, how do we use our platform? How do we use our voice? And what is that, right? So like, especially those of us who are kind of multidisciplinary, I do like content writing, social media stuff for my day job, and then music and community organizing type stuff on the side. And it's like, where can I be most impactful?
Right.
That's a question I'm asking. It's a question I'm seeing a lot of other people in the creative space ask. And I think it's a good one that we have to keep asking.
Yeah.
I don't have all the answers to it, but I think that it's important for us to be asking that question and to find a way to move forward in those things when you feel tired, right? Because that tiredness is very real, and there is a sense of like, I'm just going to give up. What's the point, right? Like I've had some of those moments, and I know other people around me have too, and I want to just like be like pushing back against that and saying no.
Oh, for sure.
Take back the system, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Shall we thank our next sponsor?
Yes. So before we continue this conversation, we want to pause and give a big shout out and a thank you to our next sponsor, which is Homespun Audio.
Yay!
So Homespun Audio is an affordable, fully outfitted home recording studio located in Seattle, Washington. And this studio is geared towards solo artists, singer-songwriters, and small ensembles. In addition to in-person sessions at their physical studio location, Homespun offers remote collaborations and mobile recording solutions. So to learn more about working with Sam Kutstuntz, the creative genius behind Homespun Audio, go and check out his website, which is homespunaudioseattle.com. So we want to say, yay, Sam!
And Sam's right off camera over there. He's doing the audio for this, of course.
Amazing.
Yes.
He makes me sound so lovely and so professional.
And Sam has also produced a lot of my music, so if you're a fan of any of that, that work speaks for itself. He's a really great guy to work with. And, you know, he was actually on the podcast. So check out episode 14, which is the last episode that we did. He was our special guest on there. And he talked all about allyship and what that means as a white man working in the music industry with creatives of color. So great episode. It's one of my favorites.
It's a really good
honestly
episode.
have to say, guys, I use it as a tool. Like when people ask me about allyship to this day.
So he's famous.
I send that episode to people. Okay, so back to our questions.
All right.
What advice do you want to give to people as they navigate this moment in history and just whatever lies ahead?
That's a really big and weighty question. I would say hold space for your grief. I know for myself and for a lot of us, women of color, just people of color, especially when we're in spaces where we want to go into advocacy or go into creativity, it could be really easy for us just to jump right in and not give ourselves the space that we need to grieve our emotions, to hold our emotions. I know for me, back in 2016, there was a lot going on in my life back then, not only with everything that was going on with the elections and the incoming presidency, and there was a lot of fear. But for myself, I very quickly, with a group of friends of mine, we went straight into advocacy. And that was also kind of the time where you were really getting serious. I mean, you've always been serious about it, but in a more professional, kind of outward sort of way, serious about racial equity work and wanting to do that in a very practical kind of activist sort of a way. Yeah,
right?
No, for sure. And so what happened as a byproduct of that was I just jumped immediately from shock to then doing and completely did not hold space for any emotions, any grief. And it wasn't until maybe like a year later that, and I think now, knowing what I know, and knowing how the nervous system works and knowing polyvagal theory. I think the minute that...
Okay, therapist words.
I know. These are big fancy words for saying like, I wasn't activated. I was not on guard. And it took a year.
Yeah.
Guys, it took a year for my body to finally calm down. And in that moment, it almost, I wouldn't say collapsed, but I started having some health stuff that I had never had before. I started experiencing migraines, and I didn't know what the hell was going on until I had my first migraine, and it threw me in for a loop. And I think that was basically a boomerang effect of my body finally got that chance to just take a deep breath, and then it had this visceral physical response. I want to just speak directly to our audience, specifically to our women of color creatives that are watching. I don't want you to hear that as a way of saying, stop doing creative work.
Right.
I want you to pause, take a breath, and hold space for yourself, grieve, because I do truly believe that when we hold space for ourselves, when we work through our emotions, that actually some beautiful things can come out, and we can then express that creatively. But like I said, create the pause. Don't rush through things. It's really easy for us to do that. But I do think that there is power when we give ourselves that pause.
Yeah, this is where I'm going to go on my little anti-capitalist rant as I do. No, I was going to say, I think, art is such a powerful way to process emotions.
Yes.
But I think sometimes we have this tendency as creatives who do it professionally to think, I have to put it out as products.
Right.
So we get into this space of like creativity as a form of entertainment or something that we make money off of or whatever. And I think this is a great time to kind of let the creativity flow from that pause that you're talking about.
Yes.
So I want to talk to all the creatives specifically out there for a second. As you're pausing, as you're taking this time, journal, write those thoughts down, do whatever you need to do to kind of internally process that stuff, because you can come back to that, and that might be the very thing that gets you your next great song or your next great painting or your next great blog post or whatever form of art and creativity that you do. I don't think we should discount that. And I think sometimes we have a tendency to think if it's not like the actual thing that's going to come out and make me the monetary gain or whatever, sell the concert tickets or whatever it is, we want to kind of just like discount it. And I want to encourage people not to do that. And I want to say, use your art as an act of resistance and also historical documentation.
Yes.
I think about some of the greatest music, the greatest movies, the greatest storytelling that has ever come out in our history. It's from artists, guys, right? So we have a responsibility to some degree to create something that the people in charge are not going to put out.
No, they're
right?
not. Yeah.
And especially coming from that intersectionality of the woman of color lens that we have of being able to tell those stories from this perspective, we need that artwork. And so I'm going to encourage you all to get out there. I was talking to a friend recently, and she said, she's a designer, so she does like graphic design and art direction and stuff. And she said, well, I've been watching you on your Instagram, or I've been seeing kind of your stuff and am really inspired. And I just thought to myself, I'm not like that. I'm not like Jess. I'm not an activist, is what she said.
Right.
And I just want to say, everybody can be an activist right now. And you can do it in ways that are like specific to whatever area of expertise you kind of have. It doesn't have to be a picket line or, social media posts even or whatever. Like, find your lane.
Right.
And use what you're good at, your giftings, your talents, your skills. Like, I'm sure I'm going to be writing music from this experience. I've already started to.
Right.
And if you listen to some of my other music, like, there's songs that have come out of kind of these catastrophic events that we've had,
which it's been really incredible to watch that. And I can speak to this, to see your creative process where you, and I would say you paused, you held space, you processed, you lamented, and you grieved. And from that pain, beautiful art has come forth. And so I want to encourage you guys to like go through, hold space, but like don't be stifled, because out of the pain, some beautiful things can come out of it. And I want to speak to the people who think that they're not creative. I know sometimes this is a little minion. I don't know what it is, like this little like mindset that I have that I'm not creative because I'm not a person that's producing, creating art for the masses. Like Jess was saying, that creativity can be such a powerful tool, but it's also a powerful political act. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, some of the most, like, I think of like some really famous artists that we know, like out of their art, like it was very, very political, and created not only storytelling, but it also gave a snapshot of what was going on in that time frame. And
it's like a time capsule for us now.
It really is. Yep. It really is.
Yeah.
So this past summer, Jess and I came across this quote by an individual named Damon Garcia, who's a Latin author and a speaker. And he talks about this idea of radical imagination.
Yay, this is my favorite
I know.
part.
So here's the quote. So the quote says, "Resist apathy and cynicism. Remember, what is institutionalized can be dismantled. What is colonized can be decolonized. This requires radical imagination, which means imagining a new type of world with new systems and living in a new way." So good.
So good. We had a whole retreat this past summer where we unpacked, that was sort of our anchor statement for the weekend. And we spent a lot of time thinking about the systems in which we live, right? That's why this podcast started, was thinking about those systems and how women of color, specifically in the music space, didn't always feel like they had a voice,
right?
Because the industry is so dominated by white men. And how do we take back that system? It starts with that radical imagination, right? So I love that. Yeah. How does that sit with you? What does that make you think?
I'm going to throw out the therapy lingo here. When we're in a state of activation, our nervous system literally is in fight or flight or a trauma response. It can be really, really hard to tap into imagination. And the reason why is because we're in heightened states. And so this is why it's so important to find these ways to care for ourselves, so that we can tap into that imagination. And let me tell you what, there are some beautiful things that can happen when people have that space to not only imagine, but to radically imagine what would a world look like if these systems were no more. And how do we get a step closer to that, and a step closer to that, and a step closer to that. So it was something that was beautiful, that retreat that we did. It had me thinking, it had me really questioning things that I do in my own life. And it's been cool. It's been cool to see how this quote and holding that space to allow myself to imagine a world that looks different, imagine my life and just my day-to-day interaction to look different, how it has really shifted things that are literally happening in my life right now. So
I have found myself coming back to a lot of those same conversations. They were grounding. And really, we can sit here and talk about a retreat we went on, big whoop, who cares?
Right.
But I think the goal here is what we're saying is like building community and finding people that you can have these kinds of conversations with. Maybe it's right here in the comment section of this episode or wherever, but find your people and find those people that you can be imaginative with, and, think about practical steps that you can take to then shift things and move things forward. The other question that just came to mind as I was talking was something I want to ask you. How do you let the imagination not sort of spiral into a negative place? Because I think there's two sides to imagination. There's the imagination, the radical imagination that we're talking about here, which is, I think, attached to hope, and that idea of envisioning bigger, better, just systems and ways of being. There's hope attached to that. What about the imagination that's kind of sending us down a pathway of fear.
You mean a spiral?
A spiral.
Yes. I have a lot of thoughts about that, but I'll keep it brief.
So how do we navigate that?
One of the things, and I'm not going to go into our Christian upbringing, but there was a verse that my mom had me memorize that talked about, basically it's like mindset work. And it talks about like, if you're noticing your thinking patterns are not aligned in a certain way, then something's got to shift. Essentially, that's the big context of it. So one of the things that I think is so important is, am I tuned in? So am I attuned to myself? So what I mean by that is, when I'm noticing these thought patterns, like, how am I feeling? Is it helping me or is it hurting me? Now, if it's helping me, then yeah, like, let me keep going down that rabbit hole. Like, let's go there. But if it's causing me distress or it's hurting me, then that's a big cue for me. I'm like, I got to shift out of this. Now, there's also very practical things, like as a therapy, is like asking, like, am I in an emotional spiral? Emotions, even though they're valid. However, sometimes we can't just wallow in certain emotions because it's just spiraling down.
But some wallowing's okay because that's where your great songs come from if you're me, at least.
Yes, to a point, guys. To a point.
I'm just saying.
You're so sassy. You're so sassy. But I would say, if you're wallowing and you're stuck and there's no momentum, then taking some moments to then pull yourself out of it. Now, I will say this. I'm not talking about like toxic positivity. I'm not talking about like silver lining stuff. No. But I would say just like taking that moment to ask yourself some really practical questions, like, how am I feeling? How is this helping me? Is it harming me? Is this based off of facts? Is it based off of my emotions? There's a really very common technique in the therapy world that's literally called checking the facts. Literally, is this concept of like, let me go by the facts. Let me try to tap into some logic versus tapping into my emotions to kind of get me out of that emotional spiral. But yeah, and then honestly too, and I know for me, some stuff that I've been doing is a lot of mindset work. And it's the same concept of just like, what is the internal beliefs that I have about myself and my ability to do things? And is it getting me closer to what I'm hoping to get towards, or is it moving me away? So
that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Always such great wisdom from the mental health specialist right here on the Takeback Podcast. Anything else you want to say to our listeners? Kind of any final pieces of advice?
Be in community. Don't do this alone. Please do not. If anything that we have learned in this time and being in relationship with one another, I really truly believe that I would not be where I'm at today. I wouldn't be the semi-healthy version. I don't think I'm... Is anyone truly fully healthy? I don't know. But I will say this. I truly believe that if I was not connected to a community where I can wrestle and I can ask these hard questions, I wouldn't be here. I would not be sitting here today. So please do not do life alone. You always hear me say this. Go to therapy. Go to therapy. Find yourself a good therapist. Now, that's a whole nother conversation. We will not go in there about
But there is an episode where we gave some resources.
We do. We gave some practical resources and tips. We'll make sure to include those in the show notes again. But find yourself a good therapist. Specifically, people of color, do not walk through this alone. Yeah. Please tap in. Please reach out to people and take care of yourself, guys. I'm going to add one more thought to that. And that is, to all of my women of color creatives out there, and just women of color in general, people of color in general, find your allies because you're going to need them. This is a really strange season that we're in. And like I was saying earlier, it's like stuff is just coming out of the woodwork and I'm discovering people that I thought I could trust that now I'm like, I don't know about that, you know? And even in my creative life, like, you know, I'm not saying everybody has to take this advice, but at least one thing that I'm starting to do, because my music and my art is so attached to these messages around like social justice and those things, I'm honestly getting to the point where I'm like, I'm only going to work with people who kind of share these values. Yeah. Not because I'm trying to be exclusive or cut really good collaborators out of my life. Right.
But I just need people to be on the same page as me. And so, you know, I'm working on some stuff. Sam and I were just in the studio recently working on a secret project that I can't talk about yet. But it was such a joy to do that with someone that I know I can trust, who believes in not only just me as a musician in terms of my sound, but in my values. Yeah. And so I think that's really important, is to find those people who are going to back you up, who believe in the message that you're trying to spread. Yeah. And bring on collaborators like that, you know? So, and you know what? It can be white men. Sam is a white man.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with that. I think sometimes people get into this mindset that like, oh, you women of color just hate all white men. It's like, that's not what we're saying.
I mean, at least I'm married to one. So I'm married to one. Yeah. So no, and that's not the case. But I completely 100% agree. It's just like, find people that you know that share the similar values, and that are going to lean in and lift you up.
Amplify your voice, exactly. Right? That's what this podcast is all about. So speaking of allies, we want to give one more shout out to our third and final sponsor of the episode, which is Aaron Sternke. Aaron is a music producer and a multi-creative here in the Seattle area. He has over 25 years of experience and offers a variety of creative services, including full album production, music mixing and mastering, photography, videography, and more. He's in fact doing the video for this. So if we look good, it's all because of Aaron.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you.
So if you're looking for a producer, an engineer, or a creative collaborator who is going to be on your side,
so important,
check out Aaron. His website is aaronsternke.com. That's AARONSTERNKE.com.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of the Takeback Podcast. I cannot believe I'm saying that.
I know.
That's wild. So thank you so much for listening and being here with us today. We've enjoyed putting together this episode, and we hope that this helped and encouraged you in some way. We'll leave all the links of the things that we've mentioned, our sponsors and different resources that we find helpful, in our show notes, probably down below here. Make sure to check those out. And if you have any thoughts or feedback that you'd like to share with us, maybe something that we said might have resonated for you or something that you took away from this episode, feel free to discuss that with us. You can go ahead and leave it in the comment section, or you can send us a DM. Make sure to check out our handle. We're on YouTube and on Instagram. Our handle is at the Takeback Podcast. So guys, I know that we're living through some really difficult and some wild times, strange times, but please make sure to take care of yourselves and to take care of each other. And as we said before, keep imagining, keep creating, pause, and keep, as best as you can, tearing down and dismantling and taking back the systems that were innately designed for us. And we'll see you soon. Hopefully.
Bye. Want to be a creative revolutionary with us? Visit justplaymusic.com/podcast to learn more.